All right, we're here at my VermiHut indoor worm bin, and the last time we were in here, we added vegan cheese to the bin, both as a main feeding and a top feeding. So let's see how that top feeding went. So the plan was to check on them every day, and on day one, you can see they didn't even touch the vegan cheese. So I thought, oh, I can wait a few days. But as you see, as I roll it back on day 4, no cheese left. I was absolutely surprised. Pretty impressive, huh? So based on that, I don't expect to see any when we dig in, but we're going to add a huge feeding, and we're going to talk about some urban legends. And those are kind of like urban legends. Instead, they're for worm bins. All right, so because it was about 13 days since I've been in here, I had to put just a little bit of food on top. So we're going to go ahead and check this out before we dig in. So we'll start with the carrot and see what's right underneath it. And sure enough, check that out. Just a bunch of worms kind of underneath that carrot. And I bet you that is because as this carrot thaws out, it is shedding moisture. In fact, if I squeeze it, we're gonna get some juices flowing right here. So no doubt the worms were right underneath it, kind of getting the moisture from it. And then let's see about the apple, if there's anything underneath that. And that was kind of on a piece of paper, so it might not have got as many. But again, right underneath, I'm seeing some worms kind of hiding and absorbing the juice, or I don't know, drinking the juice of the apple. And then we've got one more right over here, and we'll see how that did. And same thing, right underneath, a bunch of worms. So I don't usually top feed whole foods like this. It's typically, worm chow or pulverized oats. But something I did want to talk about is we put oats over the whole top of this worm bin, and then we laid down the newspaper. And then we put a little strip of vegan cheese here, and you can see they really ate up the places where the vegan cheese was. So let's go ahead and, I don't know if we're going to be able to put these back on top, but I'll kind of get them out of the way, and then we will dig into this feeding and see how they did with the rest of that vegan cheese. So it was placed right in the middle in our normal feeding zone. So I'll dig under, and I'm expecting there to be a lot of castings, but probably not any kind of swarms of worms. Now we did put some banana peels that had been lingering from past feeding, so we might see some of those. And check that out, look at that. Oh yeah, right there, tons of worms. I don't know if this is because of the banana peels or even right here, I think might be some of that avocado pit that we broke up. I think that's what that is right there. So they're just kind of all in this area, but check out those worms. Tons of worms, and I have both blue worms in here and red wigglers. Right here where my pinky is kind of a chunky red wiggler. And on its back, if I can get it on its back, there was a little bit of lighter pigmentation than on the top. And then the blue worms are kind of thinner, like these right here. And they are thinner, but they're about the same length. And you can, another way to tell apart the red wigglers is their clitellum is bulging when they get to a more adult stage. Let's keep on going. Here's that broccoli stem. It's getting a little bit smaller, so that's good. Keep going in here. I'm not seeing too many of those banana peels. Right here is a little bit of the stalk or stem that you see right on a banana, and it is really fibrous inside. So we'll just kind of help them out there. Again, just some of the cardboard shreds that I put in with every feeding are showing up. And then just a little bit of kind of slow food that kind of lasts a little bit longer. And again, there's that avocado, which is really mushy. I mean, this is kind of really mushy, that avocado pit. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and dig all around this bin, and then we will set up our feeding zone. Now, one of the things that I'm doing as I'm kind of digging around here is I'm aerating out the bin to make sure there's no pockets of fermentation or, almost like an ammonia smell from being anaerobic. So coming in here and lifting up the bedding and kind of mixing it around, one, gets the stuff out of the feeding zone into the other areas, but it also adds oxygen into the lower levels. That was great. There were just a ton of worms all throughout there as I was kind of mixing up the bin. And I've tried to put some of the stuff that was here on both edges so that we kind of get a good mix of castings in the center. But the worms, to tell you the truth, are all throughout all areas of the bin, so I'm not too worried about that. So let's go ahead and start up this feeding zone. So when we set up a feeding zone, the first thing we always do is add a little bit of shredded cardboard and bedding to it. And that helps to add both a carbon source and a nitrogen source for them. So we'll add just a little bit more. And then I like to put the feedings that we had previously, any leftovers, I'll just put them kind of right down in that feeding zone. And here's where we'll kind of talk about the urban legend, or the urban legends that aren't necessarily true for a worm bin. And I'll talk today kind of on some of the foods that you hear a lot not to add to your worm bin, that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and dispel some of those rumors. So right here is one of the containers that I keep in my freezer, and I just keep adding food scraps to it. And we're going to take from here. And on the top are some things that people say not to add to your worm bin. And that is onions and peppers. These are from my garden. These peppers are here. What they really mean is don't add a whole bunch at once. And that's because an onion might last longer. It takes a little bit longer to decay, and the worms wait till it's kind of broken down a little bit more. So if you add a whole bunch of onions, then you might have a stinky bin. So the key is not just to ignore onions and not put them in there, but to just put a little bit in there. And then the same thing with peppers. I'm not sure why people say don't put them in there, because my worms attack them right away, maybe because they think the oils within them are detrimental to the worms, but I have found that not to be the case. And again, if you're not sure, just add a little bit. So the urban legend of don't put onions or peppers in your bin is not true, and we'll find out by next feeding how they've done with both of these. So as I add this onion in, I'm just going to kind of break it apart a little bit so they've got pretty good access to it. And then we'll just kind of put these peppers in like this. Now there are several channels that have put some foods in their bins that people say, you know, don't do that. And one of them just recently was Northeastworms. He put a whole bag of mandarins in one of his CFTs, which contains, I think, somewhere around 20 pounds of worms. So a whole bag of mandarins, he's going to show you that the worms will eat it. So go ahead and check that out, and he's going to dispel that urban legend. I'll put a link in the description to his video there. And then one of my favorites recently was from Connecticut Worms and Gardens, and she put a pork chop in one of her bins. And she's got a series on it, and I got to tell you, check that series out. Again, I'll put a link in the description, but you know, everybody tells you do not put meat in there, and it's not because the worms won't eat it. It's because of the other things that can happen with your worm bin. And she can tell you how to do it. If you really want to try meat in your worm bin, you will never see me try meat in my worm bin, but go ahead and give that a view. Seeing a pork chop in a worm bin over several days to a week is really impressive. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of taking out some of the big stuff that we have in here. I'm going to put this whole banana in here. And what I like to do with whole bananas is just kind of break them open so that they know they can get in there. And this should be real interesting to see as they kind of eat in here and maybe leave the peel for next feeding. And then I'll add some more carrots. We're getting a lot of carrots and strawberries this time, and bananas. That's kind of the theme here, along with our onion and pepper. And here's some cucumbers. They're growing really well in the garden right about now. As I'm looking at this, I almost feel like I'm making up for hardly feeding them with that vegan cheese, but they can handle it. There are somewhere around 4,000 to 3,000 worms in here. So this feeding is absolutely huge. If you have 100 worms, please do not feed this much. I mean, you maybe with 100 worms want to feed a couple strawberries and maybe a little bit of carrots and a part of a banana peel. If you've got 1,000, you know, maybe a quarter of what you're seeing here, but you definitely want to feed according to how many worms you have. You do not want to overfeed no matter what. So let's go ahead and add some of our amendments. And one of the amendments I've been adding lately is pulverized oats, because I had some expire. In fact, they expired 4 years ago. It's kind of embarrassing. They're in the back of the pantry. But go ahead and check your pantry out. See if you have any expired grains, and just pulverize them and put them right in. And then I always love to give a little bit of coffee grounds and tea grounds. And again, just a good food source for them. And here's another urban legend that AJ talked about, and that is, does coffee work as grit for the worms? And it actually does not, and he explains it. But if you take a coffee ground and you get it a little wet, it is soft as can be. Same with all these individual coffee grounds. So once they ingest it, it is probably soft, and it's not going to be able to be used as grit within their gizzards to help grind up the rest of their food. And speaking of grit, I use pulverized eggshells for my grit. And I just want to kind of draw your attention to the fact that I do not clump all this stuff up in one area. I kind of spread it out because if you put all these finely ground stuff into one area, the worms will have a little bit of trouble getting to the center, and then you'll just have a clump next time you look into your feeding zone. If you like what you're seeing and you appreciate the discussion, I would appreciate a like. And if you want to see more, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell icon. You'll get notified when I have more videos out, and I've got a tiny worm bin and an outdoor worm bin that I also do experiments in. And I think this is going to be good for a feeding for them. You can see it's kind of mounded up right here. I feel a little bad that took me 13 days to get in here from the last time I fed them, but they should be pretty excited with this. Now this bin is pretty high up here. It's been 47 days since we put this on the top. We're talking maybe another couple weeks before we have to switch out this bin and make it one of the bottom trays and put a new tray on top. So one of the last things I'll do here is I'll add some grains to the top. Within a day or two, they eat all these grains, and I love it. I love kind of peeking in here maybe once between feedings and seeing that they've eaten the grains. And what they also do is they will incorporate some of the newspaper that I'll put on top here as they're eating the grains. It's just remarkable to see. You can see how they ingest both the bedding and the food. All bedding is food, but not all food is bedding. So just kind of remember that if you're wondering, should I put more bedding into my worm bin as I'm feeding? And the answer is yes. All right, so we're adding the newspaper, and that will about do it. So I hope everybody is having a great day, and happy vermicomposting, everybody. Take care now.